So eCMID, Common Marine Inspection Document is what CMID stands for, and the accreditation scheme that we developed. I'm going to talk to you for the next half an hour or so about what the program is, how we got involved with it, and where we think we are adding value to the process. Let me introduce you to the players. Some of you might know IMCA, International Marine Contractors Association. They are a leading international trade body, and they essentially operate for the marine contracting industry. So their clients are everybody from BP to Esso to Shell. At the higher level, they've got people like Subsea 7, they're all names you will know, right down to small independent contractors who are operating in that sector. They're a not-for-profit organisation like IIMS. They have approximately 1,000 members, obviously very much around the world. And most of their contractors in the oil, gas and renewable industries, and increasingly in the wind farm sector. I mean, you'll hear James already talked about that earlier. The wind farm sector now is absolutely top of everyone's list at the moment. More on that later. So what is IMCA? IMCA essentially is a knowledge base. They publish good practical guidance and guidelines. They provide safety flashes. If you've never looked at an IMCA safety flash, go and have a look. Really, really impressive. And they turn those out once or twice a month, all available online. Their role is to inform their members of key changes, how the industry is developing, a forum and facilitator. They do interact between governments and marine professionals. They essentially are a common marine voice, common industry voice. So what's our involvement with them? Well, eCMID is defined as the following. Started in 1999. It's a globally recognized vessel safety audit system. And what eCMID does is it meets the aim of reducing the number of audits that are carried out on individual marine vessels by the adoption of a standard format for inspection, and it is predominantly in the offshore sector. That's not to say that won't change. IMCA are looking at whether or not they can broaden this out to other classifications of vessels. But right now, it's essentially the offshore industry. It's not a survey. It is an audit. It's a snapshot in time. In 2009, eCMID came along. Now, this is a secure online database where the CMID reports can be uploaded and stored. So the vessel owners can then access this information. The accredited vessel inspector can load the information to the database. She can also then review that as well. So they're living documents. They can be kept and updated on board a vessel as well, not just in the database. Now, essentially, eCMID originally applied to vessels over 24 meters, as well as 500 gross ton vessels. But now the development of the Marine Inspection Document for Small Workboats, better known as MISW, also applies to vessels of less than 24 meters. And again, the area that a lot of accredited inspectors get involved in is with the wind farm support, crew transfer vessels, those type of things, these fast multi-cat vessels that are going out and taking people out. And as the wind farms are going further and further offshore, so there are more and more of those vessels developing, and they're becoming more and more complex all the time. Give you a little bit of a history. I sat in the office in London with IMCA in early 2014, and it wasn't so much that IMCA had perceived a need, it was that the industry had perceived a need. So it was entirely unregulated. I've already told you I'm the least technical man you're ever going to meet, or certainly here anyway. I could go on to the IMCA website, I could download the document itself, potentially I could go and ring Esso and say, oh, you've got any vessels that need a CMID doing? Oh yeah, we've got a couple out there, would you mind going and doing it? I could charge them a fee, I could get on board those vessels, no one's going to check my credentials. Complete lunacy in this day and age. So it was the industry coming to IMCA saying, we just don't know who's getting on board these vessels. Some of these vessels are really, really complex. Pipe and cable layers, heavy lift, really, really specialist niche stuff. We frankly need to know, first of all, who these people are, and we need to know whether or not they're competent to get on board and look at these types of vessels. IMS was already at that time involved in running other schemes. We have a subsidiary called the Marine Surveying Academy. I'll touch on that further, but MSA essentially is the body that we use within. So we accredit the standard, but MSA is, if you like, they process and handle all of the machinery to make this actually work. So we had a series of meetings and we talked about how we might develop a plan. And I suspect most of you in this room have never developed a worldwide accreditation scheme. I certainly haven't. And it was taxing, it was challenging. And most importantly, we had to find something that, as I've said here, was robust and became auditable. So in time, we wanted to be able to go to a third party and say, come and audit what we do. You come and have a look and just ensure that if we're saying that that man can do this and he's competent to do this, this, and this, you need to be able to audit that. We put the plans in place, took some months, and then the market crashed. As you all know, the oil price collapsed. That suddenly meant that a lot of guys who were doing eCMIDs weren't doing eCMIDs because vessels were getting laid up, left, right, and centre, and that became a challenge. So just briefly on the MSA and their credentials. As I said, a wholly owned subsidiary of the IMS. It's managed for me by a lady called Hilary Axel, who's got extensive project management skills, first-class operator, and she's really taken this scheme to her heart. We also run something called the International Register of Marine Installations Inspectors Standard, IIMCA for short. Again, very niche. There aren't many of those. There's maybe 120 of them in the world who we have currently accredited. That's a rolling program too. That sector also got horribly hit in the downturn. It's coming back now. We're just sort of reactivating that after a period of dormancy. And then we have something called the Register of Marine Coatings Inspectors Standard, IMCA. We invented that about 3.5 years ago. Again, because an industry sector came to us and said, we have a problem. And the problem in this case was the competency of those who are inspecting large super yacht, and I mean mega yacht, coating systems. I don't know how many of you work in that sector, but some of those vessels now might have 12, 14 coats of paint put on them. And the problem was that the yards were saying, we want to produce a vessel that looks like a Rolls-Royce finish. And the owner is expecting a Rolls-Royce finish. And when the boat comes out, the owner walks down the quay and he says, well, there's a blemish there. My Rolls-Royce doesn't have a blemish on it like that. Sorry, that's not good enough. And as many as 50% of these giant ships, they are ships, not boats, coming out of the yards were subject to a litigation claim because of the quality of the paint finish. So this standard was really to drive up the skill set of those who are involved in inspecting super yacht coatings. And again, it's quite niche. We've put about 130 people through in the last 3 years. It's an intensive week-long course. There is an examination at the end of it, and you come out with a badge. And what's happening now in that sector is that the big yards are simply saying, if you're not an RMCI qualified inspector, you're not coming in our yard. So it's starting again quite a lot of teeth, which is exciting. The development phase was challenging. As I said, the scheme had to be robust, and yet it did need to have some flexibility in it. And as I said, it had to be auditable by a third party. Most importantly, what we developed had to be acceptable to the industry. Yes, the industry was saying we need something. There's no point us developing something that's completely wrong. So we engaged with some of the major players to make sure that they were involved steps along the way. What sort of vessel types were there? We had to agree the vessel types that we were going to accredit people for. We had to develop an assessor panel, and that is a group of peers, really, industry peers who all work in this sector. But who would they be? How are we going to teach them, induct them? Because every assessor has to work pretty much to a common standard. You can't have one assessor who says, he's great, he's worth 100%. No one says, oh, I don't like him, he's only worth 50%. So we had to find people and then teach them and train them how to work the grid and the score sheets. We had to find our trainers. James mentioned he went on a course in Houston. Ian Coates trained that one, can you remember? Yeah, Ian's fantastic. Ian is our lead trainer. We have now half a dozen trainers who we use around the world. And of course, then you have to train the trainers. So what information are they going to be putting out? They all use the same presentation. But as I know, because I've been to a few, they all present it entirely differently. That, of course, is acceptable, but it's important they are getting the key points across every time. And funny enough, have you ever tried to develop an application format? Oh, it's so complicated. Forms are stupidly complicated. How do you make something that's easy? It is a Word document format, but what we had to do in that form was to draw out the objective evidence, because this is all about objective evidence. If you want to be able to look at that vessel type, prove objectively that you know what that vessel type is and you've worked on it and you understand it, how it works and operates. So the form actually was the thing I had more sleepless nights about than anything else, was to try and make something easy. And of course, a lot of people, again, as James alluded to, English is not necessarily their first language. So if you've got some guy from China who's applying, the form has to be simple enough for him to understand, as it is for you guys who all speak English. So how does the scheme work? The applicant will complete and submit their application. Most of those come in electronically online, not all, but most. Hilary and her team will then check the content of the application. We didn't do that initially. We found an application came in, we just sent it straight off to an assessor, and the assessor came back and said, well, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have a COC, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have that. Don't bother sending it to me. So we were really wasting the assessor's time. So what Hilary and her team have done, non-technical people, but they now have a checklist. So they are looking for, has he got a COC here? Have we got his education details here? Yes, tick, tick. So they are probably 85% sure when they send something out to an assessor that it's not going to get kicked back because of lack of information. So they will check, as I say, qualifications, work experience, and most importantly, that they have that objective evidence in their application. They're then forwarded to the eCMID assessor. Our terms of business are that we will turn those around within 28 days. Rare, we take 28 days. We can normally process those in 14 to 21 days. And as I've said, these are a group of peer group professionals who are available to MSA to verify the credentials. There's about a dozen of them, and they're all worldwide, and they all operate to a very high standard. And they are all also accredited eCMID inspectors, so they've been through the hard yards. Just a few numbers for you. Numbers speak a lot, actually, don't they? Since we pushed this scheme out, we've had 509 applications. If you'd asked me 3 years ago how many applications would we have had, I never would have thought it would have been 509. Even though we think, well, if you talk to IMCA, IMCA aren't really sure, because as I explained earlier about the vagaries of downloading this document, anyone could do it. They thought there could be as many as 3,000 people operating worldwide in this market. Then with the crash, when the crash came, they thought probably half of those might have just disappeared and dropped out because there was no work, leaving possibly, and they still don't know, but on their database, they know of about 1,500 people. So it would look to me as if a third have now come forward for formal accreditation. There have been 32 fails, and I'm going to give you, no names, but I'm going to give an example of somebody who failed quite early on in the scheme. And he came forward for accreditation, he supplied all his information. If I told you that his day job, or his night job, was a pizza delivery boy, 24-year-old pizza delivery boy. This guy was getting on board jack-up barges to conduct CMIDs and charging well-known clients a lot of money to do it. He failed on every level. In fact, the assessor said to me, what on earth have you sent this to us for? I'm not even going to bother assessing this application. It's pointless. He's 24. He has no knowledge. He has not been to sea. He's a pizza delivery boy. Now, I'm giving you the worst case scenario here, but this guy was out there doing work and earning money for it. Completely nonsensical. A lot of people will come forward and they withdraw when they realize that perhaps they're not going to make the standard, because we start asking questions and we say, well, we can't see this and we can't see that. They say, well, I'd rather withdraw my application. They withdraw their application, that's fine. We currently have 46 sitting out with assessors, and there are now 401 who actually got the badge and got the standard. I think I'm quite proud of that. I think we're very proud of it. I think what we've done in a relatively short space of time is to take an unregulated market sector and really shake it up. The renewal rate, they do need to keep their accreditation fresh. So every year we'll put them through a renewal process. We charge £190, what's that, $250, James? Something like that, a year. For that, they get a badge. Obviously, they need their badge. The badge is dated. So they've got a 1-year validation. We expect, in fact, we insist on them having done CPD, continuing professional development, over that year. So they have, I think it's 12 points they need to acquire in the year from doing various things just to prove they're still current. So those are all important things. A little bit on the training that James alluded to. James was on one of the very first course. The very first course, okay. So that was in 2015, we ran 3 courses. 2016, we did 10 courses. And I have to say, we've been all over the world with this. We've done a couple in Australia, we've done some in Singapore, a couple in America, quite a lot in the UK, particularly up in Aberdeen. There's a lot of this stuff happening up there, quite a lot in Europe. So we've done 3 this year already in the first quarter. So we put through 373 delegates. I have to say, the one statistic on this screen that astonishes all of us is that 105 people who have not yet applied for accreditation have actually been on the course. You're one of them. So James has done the course, but then hasn't come forward for the accreditation. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe they just came along to understand what it was all about, and it is a pretty full-on day. So we still have 96 delegates who have gone through the first stage of having their, I should have pointed out, you have to do the course within 2 years. So your accreditation is subject to you doing the course if you want to become an AVI. So they have 2 years to complete that process. So you do know you're on the right track when potential AVIs come forward. And I have to say, that's not really our job to make that happen. That's IMCA's job. Ultimately, IMCA are the organising organisation. We just run the accreditation scheme. So we are reactive. It's IMCA who are the proactive guys who are out there pushing this to the market, pushing this to potential people who are doing this work to come forward for accreditation. You know you're on the right track when established vessel owners, and I'll give you some names shortly, and operators start to insist on only eCMID AVIs boarding their vessels. In other words, here's my badge, here's my AVI number, reference me onto the website, you can see I'm there, and you can see the vessel types I'm accredited to do. So it's quite highly regulated. You know you're on the right track when vessel owners ring up and say, where's the nearest AVI to me? I need some guy to come on board and do some work. And the website is actually quite productive. People are increasingly using it now to look for AVIs. And we developed a SASE website to enable us to do that. Let me just touch on the training course, which, as James said, is a 1 day, 8 hours, I think, something like that, James? 8-hour course, something like that. Start at 9:30 in the morning. So it's essentially split into 4 modules. We've revised this actually already several times since we kicked off. Module 1 looks at an introduction to eCMID version 11. Yes, there are 10 previous versions, and the MASIW, the small workboat supplement I mentioned. It talks about the principles of eCMID, the inspection process, what you are expected to do, the code of conduct and those types of things. We look at the structure of the new version, and we look at the use of photos. Module 2, we have a practical session when we look at the eCMID database. That's changed quite a lot actually in recent months. So it's important that we tell people about the new functions, report production amendments, and the utility for SMS auditing. Module 3, we look at some of the regulatory stuff. IMO updates, there's plenty of those always, SOLAS, MARPOL. The UK MCA Small Workboat Code is a really interesting document actually, and we do spend some time on that. We look at the code of conduct for accredited vessel inspectors, which is what AVI stands for. And we also talk through the IMCA and IMS structures as well. Interestingly enough, all the answers to the exam at the end, well, it's a multiple choice question, it's not really an exam, but all of the questions are in here, all of the answers are in here. So we say to people, listen carefully, because all of the answers will be in here. So module 4, revision of the key points, and then this 20-question multiple choice test. We do expect people to get 15 out of 20. So I think there have only been 2 who have not done that, and we put them both through a reset. And one of them didn't know that IIMS was the awarding body, which struck me as a little bit frightening, really, since we spent the whole day telling them that IIMS was the awarding body, but they didn't realise we were. Remarkable. So the aims of this 1-day course essentially are to, by the end of the course, you will know the eCMID question sets. And those that are intended, you are intended to audit. You'll understand the document structure. It's a checklist, it's a tick box. I don't know how many pages, I can't remember, but lots and lots of pages. But it's not just a case of putting a tick in a box, because you need to put comments in as well. If you find a fault, you've got to record the fault, record the deficiency. That then sits with the master of the vessel and the vessel owner as well, so that they can always reference back to that and they can make sure any recommendations that are made are then done. You'll learn how the eCMID database works. It's not complicated, but there are many avenues to explore on that database. You'll understand how you build your eCMID report for a specific vessel type. And I didn't mention actually earlier, there are 6 vessel types, and the heavy lift is one, pipe and cable area is another, small workboat is another. There's a general category. What have I missed, James? I've missed one. Oh, jack-up barges. I think that's probably it. So those are the categories. Oh, dynamic positioning was the other one. Very important, DP. A lot of people in the offshore sector involved in DP systems and auditing those systems. So you'll learn how to upload your report onto the database, and that's not difficult to do, but you need to understand how. James touched on ISOs earlier. You will understand the principles of the ISM code, in particular ISO 19011, and you will understand the expectations of both the International Institute of Marine Surveying and the International Marine Contractors Association. Now, I popped a couple of slides in here just to give you an idea of how the training day operates. So here's an example. So you won't be presented necessarily all this. You'll be presented in a little workshop group. So we generally have 15 or 20 people on these courses as an average. We'd split you into groups of 3 or 4. We'd show you this image and say, what are your findings? What are you seeing? What are you reporting in your audit? So the inspector, brake linings renewed on the 27th of February 2015, bands inspected at the same time. Windlass brake lining was loose and was fitted with bent screws instead of rivets. Mooring lines in use at the time of the inspection were in an acceptable condition. The master came back and said, or commented, awaiting rivets to correctly fit, secure the lining. The operator said, rivets are now on board and linings will be correctly fitted. So, the role of the inspector or the auditor is to assess the condition of all mooring equipment, brakes, wires, and lines, note the date when the brake hands were last inspected, and whether a policy is in place for testing brakes. And the original question, 16.3, is, are anchors, cable, and securing arrangements available for use and defect-free? So this is a real live example. So then what happens is the guys go away, they work in their group, they come back, and then they feedback what they've seen and they discuss it. And it does provide for some really interesting feedback. I'll give you another example. Is LSA equipment free from defects? So the inspector's comments were, on inspection of the ship's LSA equipment, several items were found to have deficiencies. Life rafts not fitted with HRU, secured with rope. No pyrotechnics on board with a valid date. We love point 3. The vessel EPIRB was found wrapped in a black plastic bin bag and lashed with rope. Other items were found in order at the time of the audit and corresponding in the storage location to the LSA plan. So the master's comments as to why the EPIRB was wrapped in black plastic bin lining was the EPIRB was stolen. So we tried to hide the new one. Clearly not acceptable. So these are the type of things that you would look at, study, understand, and these are real life examples, I say, that actually come from audits that have been undertaken. I touched on continuing professional development a little earlier. As with IIMS members, it's no different. We do expect people to undertake continuous professional development. Why? Because technology is changing fast, materials change, vessels change, they develop new features and so on. New technology is happening all the time. So we believe learning should never stop, regardless of age. And most of us involved, or most of you involved in this business are at the, I'm going to be polite now, at the upper end of the age scale, not the lower end. You don't see many young surveyors walking around the quays and docks. So that's just the way it is. But learning should never stop. CPD should never be onerous. And to try and make it less onerous, we're launching an app. We launched the IIMS CPD app this time last year. It's been a huge success. So you just simply pick up your smartphone. If you were here today and you're an IIMS member, pick up your smartphone, log in, claim your points, done. That sends an email to the office. They will then accept those points and your account is credited. So that new app is ready to launch. It's coming in May. And we do believe that standards matter and are vitally important. And when I was here last year, and really over much of the last 2 years, I've talked increasingly about the need to raise the bar and to increase standards generally across the industry. And I think that is something that collectively we have a responsibility to do. They are expected to fill in a logbook, so not for every inspection they do, but we would expect them to see 3 logbooks across the year. Used to be an old-fashioned little A5 format hard handbook, and to be honest, that was ridiculous. It was so old-fashioned. We've now moved this all into an online format, so it's just a form. You fill it in, and then you click submit. You can do an electronic signature on it, so you put your mark on it. Easy to complete, no paperwork, very simple to do. The girls in the office can then look at that and say, right, he's done 3 inspections in the last year, we can put a tick in the box. There have been some big majors who've actually endorsed the scheme in just in the last few months. You may or may not know these 3 companies, but Vattenfall are one of the leading Swedish utility companies, heavily involved in wind farm developments. And I got to meet the director of the fleet. He's an ex-master mariner. And he said to me, he said, Vattenfall will now only use AVIs. Nobody else will get on board our vessels. Wonderful. Dong Energy, and again, another major who you're probably familiar with, working extensively in the North Sea with wind farm and so on. They too have said we will only allow AVIs onto our vessels, and Siemens, a name that needs no introduction, have also said likewise. So the scheme is gaining teeth, and more importantly, we are freezing out people in this sector who are not competent to do this work. And ultimately, for me, that's what it's all about. If you're not competent, don't understand those vessels, you shouldn't be going anywhere near them. There are some big changes to eCMID that have been rolled out. Well, they started rolling out from January, and there's more to come. Obviously, we just administer the scheme, but it's IMCA who set policy. And from the 1st of January, the biggest change they said was that only AVIs who have the badge will be able to upload to the eCMID database. Now, that is a fundamental change because anyone could upload before. Now, if you're not an AVI, you can't upload. So 2 things happened. We had a surge of interest in applications. Obviously, people wanted to be registered so they could take part in this. And I mean a surge. I mean, November, December were crazy, absolutely crackers. We got way behind, but we've caught up. And only eCMID AVIs can access the inspector function of the eCMID. So if you're not accredited, you're now frozen out. And we've had people ring us up saying, I can't upload a CMID anymore. Well, what's your AVI number? Well, I don't have one. Well, that's why you can't upload. Well, what do? Well, you need to apply and you need to do a course. Right, fine. So it's kind of driving it. It's a self-perpetuating function. And it's proved to be really, really interesting. What is also interesting is we actually, although we don't create the policy, we actually have the power, and it's quite considerable power, to be able to give an AVI access to the IMCA database. So we set them up as a user, creates their login and their password, and then from there on, they're then okay and they can upload. So that's been a big change. I touched on these numbers earlier, really, but people keep asking me, how big is this scheme potentially? We don't really know. As I said, 3,000 perhaps working in the sector, probably halved with the downturn. It could be 1,000 that are currently operating. Perhaps 750 will come forward. I don't know. We've got 500 now, or 500 applications. I think 750 is a realistic goal. And then it's about maintaining it. It's about continuing to develop those inspectors. And then as they retire off, making sure that new ones come in at the lower end. Website presence, if you want to go and dig around and have a little bit more, eCMID vesselinspectors.com will take you there. We developed a new logo. We've done some rebranding. Strange moving from CMID to eCMID. You wouldn't think that the addition of the letter E would make a huge difference until you trawl through page after page after page of stuff and you realize that it's everywhere. So that took a long, long time to do. We've added a searchable map. So each AVI has his own little pin on the map. identifies where he's based, and when you click on it, it reveals who he is, his name, his telephone number, and most importantly, the vessel types he can do. So it's all about matching this AVI to the vessel type. So if you're sitting there with a jack-up and this AVI can't do a jack-up, don't call him, because he's not going to be able to help you. And that's where the scheme, I think, is quite strong. So I didn't mention earlier is that a lot of people apply for all classifications. I think there are only 2 who've come forward who've actually got all classifications. You need to be a really, really good operator to be able to work across all of those different classifications of vessels. It's simply not possible, I would suggest. So most people are going to get 2, 3, maybe 4. We've had quite a lot of people who've come forward just for the small workboat one, particularly those who are working in the wind farm sector, which I said is growing strongly. I heard a figure the other day saying there's now about 600 wind farm vessels floating around in the North Sea, these fast crew transfer vessels. So that's growing. They just want to be able to look at those. So you can still have a specialism within all of this. You don't need to be a generalist. You know, you can specialize in specific areas depending on your skills and where you've been and what you've done. So I guess that's all I want to say. I'll leave you with this quote. I don't know if you know Gordon Ramsay. He's an obnoxious British chef. I really can't stand the man. I shouldn't be recording this, should I? I'll be sued. I don't like him. But he came out with this quote that I really like. The minute you start compromising standards for whatever reason, that's it, game over. And for me, that's what underpins any accreditation scheme. You cannot compromise the standards. That is how it is. We keep pushing the bar up, and we expect those AVIs to continue to meet that. So thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything. Thank you. Yeah.
If you, is there any